I was standing in my own kitchen, hands shaking, staring at the roasted chicken I'd spent 4 hours preparing. Golden brown skin, herb butter under the breast, rosemary and thyme from my own little garden box on the windowsill. The kitchen still smelled like heaven, and my mother-in-law, Karen, was scraping the entire thing, the whole bird, the roasted potatoes, the homemade gravy, into the trash can, right in front of me. She didn't even look up. "This is garbage," she said, pressing the pedal on the trash can with her foot like she was disposing of a dirty diaper. "I don't know what you thought you were doing, but this isn't food, not for my family." I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but before I could form a single word, my husband walked in. Brandon. The man I'd been married to for 6 years. The man who used to tell me my cooking was the reason he fell in love with me. He looked at the trash can. He looked at his mother. He looked at me and he said, "Mom's right, Ashley. You should have asked her what she wanted. Just thank her for being honest and make another chicken. We have guests." Thank her. Cook another chicken. Right now. I remember my vision going blurry, not from tears, from rage. Pure, white-hot, electric rage that started in my chest and radiated outward until my fingertips were tingling. I looked at the trash can where 4 hours of my life sat on top of coffee grounds and banana peels. I looked at Karen, who was already smirking, already turning back toward the dining room where Brandon's sister, his aunt, and his cousin were waiting. She'd won. She knew it. Brandon knew it. Everyone in that house knew it. But what none of them knew, not Karen, not Brandon, not a single person sitting at that table, was what I was about to carry out of that kitchen. Let me back up, because if I start there, you'll think I'm crazy. And maybe I am, a little. But you need to understand what my life looked like before that Thanksgiving. You need to understand what I built, what I gave up, and exactly how small the cracks were before the whole thing shattered. I met Brandon Whitfield in 2017 at a friend's barbecue in Overland Park, Kansas. I was 26. He was 29. I was working as a dental hygienist at a practice off Metcalf Avenue, making about $52,000 a year, which felt like real money to me because I'd grown up in a double-wide outside Salina where dinner sometimes meant cereal and tap water. I put myself through community college, transferred to a 4-year program, got my license, and built a life that I was genuinely, honestly proud of. I had a 1-bedroom apartment with actual furniture, not milk crates and futons, but a real couch from West Elm that I'd saved for 8 months to buy. I had a credit score of 741. I had a little savings account with $11,400 in it. I was doing okay. Brandon was an operations manager at a logistics company. He made good money, around $78,000, and he drove a clean Silverado and wore button-downs that actually fit. He was tall, dark-haired, had this crooked smile that made you feel like you were the only person at the party. That first night, he brought me a beer without asking, sat down next to me on a lawn chair and said, "You look like someone who has strong opinions about potato salad." And I did. I really did. We talked for 3 hours about food, about growing up broke, about wanting more. He'd grown up middle class in Lenexa, but his dad had left when he was 12, and his mom had worked 2 jobs to keep them in the same school district. He respected hard work. At least that's what he told me. We dated for a 1.5 years. It was good, really good. He was attentive, thoughtful, consistent. He remembered things I said weeks later. He showed up when he said he would. He met my mom, who was living in assisted care by then, and brought her flowers. Not grocery store carnations, but actual arranged flowers from a shop. He was kind to waitresses. He tipped well. All the green flags you pray for. The one yellow flag, and I noticed it, I swear I did, was Karen. His mother was a retired school secretary who lived alone in a 3-bedroom ranch house in Olathe. She was 61, perfectly healthy, sharp as a tack, and she called Brandon every single day, sometimes twice. He never missed her call. If we were at dinner and his phone rang and it was Mom, he'd hold up one finger and answer, every time. "She raised me alone," he said once when I gently brought it up. "She sacrificed everything. I'm all she has." I understood that. I respected it even. My own mom was fading by then. Early onset dementia, only 58 years old, and I would have given anything for her to call me every day and actually know who I was. So I told myself Karen's closeness with Brandon was sweet, endearing, a sign that he valued family. We got married in October 2019. Small ceremony, 60 guests, a venue in the West Bottoms that used to be a warehouse. I made the appetizers myself, bruschetta, stuffed mushrooms, a cheese board that people still talk about. My dress was off the rack from BHLDN, $900, and I felt like a queen. Brandon cried when he saw me walk down the aisle. His best man, Tyler, later told me he'd never seen Brandon that emotional. Karen wore white, a cream-colored lace dress that was close enough to bridal that 3 of my friends texted me about it afterward. I didn't say anything. I chose peace. That was my first mistake, but it wouldn't be my last. We bought a house in Spring Hill, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath built in 2016 with a nice backyard and a 2-car garage. $247,000, 30-year mortgage at 3.8%. I put $8,000 of my savings toward the down payment. Brandon put in $12,000. We split everything proportionally, fairly. I felt like a real adult. I felt like I'd made it. The girl from the double wide now had a house with granite countertops and a gas range stove that made me want to cry every time I turned it on. I loved cooking. Always had. When you grow up hungry, food becomes sacred. It's not just sustenance. It's love. It's safety. It's proof that you made it out. I'd taught myself from YouTube videos and library cookbooks, and by the time Brandon and I were married, I could make a Thanksgiving dinner that would make your grandmother weep. Herb roasted turkey, cornbread stuffing with sage sausage, sweet potato casserole with the brown sugar pecan topping, green bean casserole from scratch, not the canned soup version, homemade cranberry sauce, and 3 kinds of pie. I'm not bragging. Okay, maybe a little. But it mattered to me. That food was my art, my therapy, my love language. Our first Thanksgiving as a married couple was at our house. I invited Karen, of course. She came, sat at the head of the table, my table, and ate everything on her plate. She didn't compliment the food, not once, but she ate 2 helpings of stuffing, so I figured that was compliment enough. After dinner, while I was washing dishes, she cornered me in the kitchen. "The turkey was a little dry," she said, drying a glass with a towel. "Next year, maybe brine it overnight. That's what I used to do." My turkey was not dry. I'd brined it for 18 hours and basted it every 45 minutes. But I smiled and said, "Great tip, Karen. I'll try that." Brandon appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here?" "Perfect," Karen said brightly. "Just giving Ashley some cooking advice. She's learning." She's learning. Like I was a child. Like I hadn't just fed 8 people a meal that took me 2 days to prepare. But I swallowed it. I smiled. I chose peace again. That became the pattern. Every holiday, every family dinner, every time Karen set foot in my house, there was a comment. The pot roast was tough. The lasagna was heavy. The lemon bars were too sweet, not like my recipe. She never said anything in front of Brandon, not directly. It was always in the kitchen, just the 2 of us, in that soft, helpful tone that made it sound like she was doing me a favor. And every time I smiled, I nodded, I thanked her. For 3 years, I thanked that woman for insulting my food in my own home. But 2022 was when things shifted. It started small, so small I almost didn't notice. Brandon got promoted to regional director, which meant more money but also more stress, more travel, more late nights. He started coming home exhausted and irritable. When I'd have dinner ready, he'd pick at it and say he'd already eaten at the office. When I'd suggest date nights, he'd say he was too tired. And when Karen called, which was now 3 times a day, he'd take the phone into the other room and close the door. One night in September, I overheard him on the phone. I wasn't eavesdropping, I was walking past the bedroom door, which was cracked open. "She doesn't get it, Mom," he was saying. "She's not. She doesn't understand how things should be." A pause. I know you're right. You're always right." My stomach dropped. I stood there in the hallway holding a basket of laundry, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. He was talking about me. To her. And whatever she was saying on the other end, he was agreeing with every word. I didn't confront him that night. I told myself I'd misheard. I told myself it was about work, maybe a female colleague, maybe a client. It didn't have to be about me. People vent to their mothers. It's normal. But the cold thing in my chest didn't go away. It sat there like a stone, and every day it got a little heavier. Because deep down, in the place where you know the truth before your brain lets you think it, I already understood what was happening. Karen wasn't just his mother. She was his compass, his authority, his true north. and somewhere along the way, she had decided that I wasn't good enough for her son. The only question was when Brandon would say it out loud. Thanksgiving 2022 was 6 weeks away. Karen had already called to discuss the menu. She wanted to invite Brandon's sister Megan, his Aunt Patricia, and his cousin Rachel. "A real family Thanksgiving," she said on speakerphone while Brandon nodded along. "Ashley, you'll handle the cooking, of course. You always do." She said it like it was a compliment. But her eyes, fixed on me across the kitchen island, said something entirely different. They said, "Perform, prove yourself, and this time I'll be watching." I should have said no. I should have suggested a restaurant, a potluck, anything. But I didn't. I said yes. I said I'd make it perfect. And I did make it perfect. Every single dish, flawless. I started prepping 3 days early. I dry brined the chicken, yes, chicken, not turkey, because Karen had mentioned once that she preferred roast chicken and I was still, God help me, trying to please her. I made my grandmother's cornbread from memory. I roasted root vegetables with maple glaze. I baked a pecan pie and a pumpkin cheesecake from scratch. The morning of Thanksgiving, I was up at 5 a.m. The house smelled incredible. The table was set with real cloth napkins and the good china we'd gotten as wedding gifts and never used. I was proud, nervous, but proud. The guests arrived at 2. Karen walked in first, looked around, and said nothing. Not, "The house looks nice." Not, "Something smells good." Nothing. She just set her purse down on the counter, right next to my cooling rack of fresh rolls, and asked Brandon where she should sit. And that cold stone in my chest? It pulsed. Dinner was called at 2:30. I carried out the chicken on my grandmother's serving platter, the one nice thing she'd ever owned, white ceramic with tiny blue flowers around the rim. The bird was gorgeous. I'd let it rest for 20 minutes under foil, and when I pulled the foil off at the table, the skin crackled. Steam rose. The smell hit the room like a warm hug. Megan, Brandon's sister, actually gasped. "Oh my God, Ashley, that looks incredible." I smiled, a real smile, the first one all day. "It looks adequate," Karen said, unfolding her napkin with 2 fingers like she was at the Ritz. "A bit small for this many people, don't you think?" It was a 7-pound bird for 6 people, with 4 side dishes and 2 desserts. But I didn't take the bait. I set the platter down and started carving. My hands were steady. I'd practiced this. I knew what I was doing. Brandon's Aunt Patricia, a quiet woman in her 60s who always wore reading glasses on a chain, leaned forward. "The table looks beautiful, Ashley. You really went all out." "She did," Brandon said, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt his hand on my lower back, warm and reassuring. I leaned into it. I thought, "See? He's here. He sees me. Karen's just being Karen. We'll eat, we'll survive, and by 8 o'clock they'll all be gone and I can pour a glass of wine and collapse on the couch, that hand on my back. I keep coming back to that, because it was the last time he touched me like I mattered." The meal went fine for the first 20 minutes. People ate. Cousin Rachel, who was 23 and perpetually on her phone, actually put her device down and said, "This gravy is insane, Ashley. What's in it?" I told her about the drippings, the flour roux, the splash of white wine. She looked genuinely impressed. Megan had seconds of the cornbread. Even Patricia, who barely ate, cleaned her plate. Karen ate in silence. She cut her chicken into tiny, precise pieces and chewed each one slowly, deliberately, like she was grading an exam. Every few bites, she'd pause and dab her lips with her napkin. She didn't touch the roasted root vegetables. She didn't touch the cornbread. She ate exactly 4 bites of chicken, 3 bites of mashed potatoes, and nothing else. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I kept the conversation going, kept smiling, kept refilling water glasses. This was my home, my table, my food. I wasn't going to let her silence steal my joy. Then came dessert. I'd made pecan pie and pumpkin cheesecake. The cheesecake was my showpiece, a recipe I'd developed over 3 years, with a ginger snap crust and real vanilla bean. I'd torched the top with a kitchen blowtorch to get that perfect caramelized finish. When I set it on the table, Megan literally pulled out her phone to take a picture. "Oh, none for me," Karen said, waving her hand. "I'm watching my sugar. But Ashley, sweetie, you should know, Brandon's always preferred my sweet potato pie. Haven't you, honey?" She looked at Brandon. Everyone looked at Brandon. And my husband, the man who had eaten my pumpkin cheesecake every Thanksgiving for 3 years and told me it was better than any restaurant, shrugged. "Mom's sweet potato pie is pretty legendary," he said with a little laugh. The table went quiet. Not awkward quiet. Worse, pitying quiet. Megan stared at her plate. Rachel suddenly found her phone again. Patricia adjusted her glasses and said nothing. I served the pie and cheesecake. Everyone took a slice except Karen. I ate mine without tasting it. The cold stone in my chest had grown so heavy I could barely breathe around it. After dinner, I started cleaning up. Alone. Karen had migrated to the living room couch, where she was holding court with Megan and Patricia about some neighbor's divorce. Brandon was in the garage with Rachel, showing her something on his truck. Nobody offered to help clear the table. Nobody scraped a plate. Nobody wrapped the leftovers. I stood at the sink, elbow deep in suds, and I heard Karen's voice carry from the living room. She tries, bless her heart. But you can tell she didn't grow up with this. Some women just don't have that. Instinct. Megan mumbled something I couldn't hear. "I'm not being mean," Karen continued. "I'm being honest. Brandon deserves someone who understands what a real family dinner looks like. This was fine. It was fine. But it wasn't special. Fine. The food I'd spent 3 days preparing was fine. The table I'd set with wedding china was fine. The home I'd cleaned top to bottom, the rolls I'd baked from scratch, the cheesecake I'd torched by hand, fine. Not special. I turned off the water, dried my hands on a dish towel, walked to the living room doorway. Karen saw me and her expression didn't change. Not a flicker. She knew I'd heard. She wanted me to hear. "Karen," I said, and my voice was calm, eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes right before you either cry or scream. "Can I talk to you in the kitchen for a moment?" She raised her eyebrows. "Of course, sweetheart." She followed me in. I closed the door to the hallway. We stood on opposite sides of the island, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't smile. "I heard what you said," I told her, "about my food, about me." Karen tilted her head. "I don't know what you think you heard, but I was simply... You said I don't have the instinct. You said Brandon deserves someone who understands what a real family dinner looks like. You said my Thanksgiving was fine, but not special." Karen's eyes went flat, not angry, calculating. She was recalibrating. I'd never pushed back before, not once. "Ashley," she said slowly, "I think you're being a little sensitive. I was making conversation. If you can't handle a little constructive..." "It's not constructive. It hasn't been constructive for 3 years. Every meal I cook, you have a comment. Every dish, every recipe, every effort I make, you diminish it. And you do it when Brandon's not in the room, so I can never defend myself." Something shifted in her face. The mask slipped, just for a second. Underneath was something hard and cold and ancient. The face of a woman who had decided, long before I ever roasted my first chicken, that no one would ever be good enough for her son. And she almost smiled. "You want honest?" she said quietly, leaning forward on the island. "Fine, I'll be honest. You're a nice girl, Ashley. You work hard, but you come from nothing, and it shows. It shows in your food, it shows in your home, it shows in the way you set a table." My son settled. I told him that before the wedding, and I'll tell him again tonight. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped back. My hip hit the counter behind me. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Karen's family laughing in my living room. "He settled," she repeated, like she wanted to make sure I absorbed it. "And deep down, he knows it." I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. And that's when Brandon walked in. He must have seen something on my face because he stopped in the doorway. "What's going on?" I looked at him. My eyes were burning, but I refused to cry. Not in front of her. "Ask your mother what she just said to me." Brandon looked at Karen. Karen's face transformed instantly. The hardness vanished, replaced by wide eyes and a trembling lower lip. The performance was so seamless it was almost artistic. "I don't know what happened," Karen said, her voice shaking. I complimented her dinner and she just snapped at me. She started yelling Brandon in front of everyone. "I didn't yell," I said. "I haven't raised my voice once." "You're raising it now," Brandon said. "I wasn't. I was speaking at the exact same volume I'd been speaking at for the entire conversation. But it didn't matter. Karen had tears forming in her eyes, actual tears conjured from nothing like a magic trick, and Brandon was already moving toward her, his hand on her shoulder. "Ash, come on," he said. "It's Thanksgiving. Can we just get through one holiday without drama?" Without drama. Like I was the one who created it. Like I was the one whispering poison in the living room. "Brandon, she told me you settled. She said I come from nothing and it shows." He flinched. Just barely, just a micro-expression that crossed his face and disappeared. He'd heard me. He believed me. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. He knew his mother. He knew what she was capable of. But then Karen let out a small sob, perfectly timed, perfectly pitched, and Brandon's face hardened, not toward her, toward me. "Mom would never say that," he said. "You're twisting things. You always do this." I always do this. I had never done this, not once in 3 years. I had swallowed every insult, smiled through every jab, thanked her for every backhanded comment. And now, the one time I spoke up, I always do this. "Brandon, enough. Please, just let's finish the evening. We'll talk later." We didn't talk later. Karen stayed until 9:30, and when she left, she hugged Brandon at the door for a long time, whispering something in his ear that I couldn't hear. He nodded. She patted his cheek. Then she turned to me and said, "Thank you for dinner, Ashley. It was lovely." And she smiled the kind of smile that says, "I won." That night, Brandon slept on the couch. He said he had a headache. I lay in our bed staring at the ceiling fan going around and around, and I made a decision. I would try one more time. One more holiday. I would cook the best meal of my life, and I would prove, to Karen, to Brandon, to myself, that I was enough. That was 3 weeks before the scene I described at the beginning of this story. 3 weeks before Karen scraped my chicken into the trash. 3 weeks before Brandon told me to thank her and cook another one. But in those 3 weeks, something happened that I didn't know about. Something that would make everything worse. I found out later, much later, that during those 3 weeks, Karen had been visiting our house while I was at work. Brandon had given her a key. She'd come over on Tuesdays and Thursdays, let herself in and rearrange things. Small things. She moved my spice rack. She reorganized my pantry. She replaced my dish towels with ones she'd bought. Plain white ones. More classic, she told Brandon. She went through my cookbook collection and removed 3 of them, the ones with handwritten notes from my mother in the margins, and put them in a box in the garage because they were cluttering the shelf. My mother's handwriting. My mother, who by then couldn't remember my name. Her shaky cursive in the margins of a Betty Crocker cookbook. "Ashley loves this one," next to the banana bread recipe. "Double the cinnamon next to the apple crisp." And Karen had boxed them up like junk. Brandon knew. He'd authorized it. When I discovered the missing cookbooks 2 days before the Christmas dinner, the one that would change everything, and confronted him, he said, "Mom was just helping organize. You should be grateful. She spent hours here." Grateful. That word again. Always grateful. For the woman dismantling my home piece by piece while I was cleaning other people's teeth for $52,000 a year. I found the cookbooks in the garage in a cardboard box labeled "Kitchen Donate" in Karen's handwriting. I held the Betty Crocker to my chest, and I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. My mother's handwriting. The only piece of her mind I had left, and this woman had tried to throw it away. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and searched, is my mother-in-law emotionally abusive? Then, husband sides with mother over wife. Then, signs of enmeshment. Then, at 2 a.m, the search that made my blood run cold. Can a mother-in-law destroy a marriage? Every article said the same thing. It's not the mother-in-law who destroys the marriage. It's the husband who lets her. I closed the laptop. Brandon was asleep in the bedroom. Karen's white dish towels hung from the oven handle. My spice rack was in the wrong place. And somewhere, in an assisted living facility in Salina, my mother was sleeping in a bed she didn't recognize, dreaming dreams she'd never remember, with no idea that her daughter was sitting alone in a house that no longer felt like home. Christmas dinner was in 5 days. Karen had already called to discuss the menu. I spent the next 5 days cooking like my marriage depended on it. Because it did. Christmas dinner, Karen's menu, Karen's guest list, Karen's rules. She wanted ham this time. A proper glazed ham, not that herby nonsense you do. She called 3 times to specify: bone-in, spiral cut, brown sugar, and pineapple glaze. The classic way, she said, the way normal families do it. I bought a 9-pound bone-in ham from the butcher on 135th Street, $47. I made the glaze from scratch. Dark brown sugar, Dijon mustard, pineapple juice reduced to a syrup, cloves pressed into the diamond-scored fat. I also made scalloped potatoes, green beans, almondine, homemade dinner rolls, and a chocolate layer cake with Swiss meringue buttercream that took me 6 hours. I set the table with the wedding china again. I put out candles. I even bought a centerpiece, a $30 arrangement from the florist by the Hy-Vee, because Karen had once mentioned that real hostesses use fresh flowers. Brandon watched me prep from the couch, scrolling his phone. He didn't offer to help. He didn't comment on the food. At one point, he looked up and said, "Mom's coming early, around noon. She wants to help set up." "I don't need help setting up," I said. "She's coming at noon, Ash." Karen arrived at 11:45, 15 minutes early. She walked in without knocking. She had a key now, remember, and set a Tupperware container on my counter. Inside was a sweet potato pie. "I brought dessert," she said. "Since you're doing the main course, I figured I'd handle the important part." She looked at my chocolate cake cooling on the wire rack. "Oh, you made something too. Well, we can have both, I suppose." I didn't respond. I couldn't. If I opened my mouth, something irreversible was going to come out, so I just nodded and kept glazing the ham. The guests arrived. Same cast, Megan, Patricia, Rachel, same dynamics. Karen at the head of the table, Brandon at the other end, me in the middle, serving, smiling, performing. The ham was perfect. I know it was perfect because Patricia said, "Ashley, this is the best ham I've ever had." And even Rachel looked up from her phone to nod. Megan had 2 helpings. The scalloped potatoes disappeared. The rolls were gone in 10 minutes. Karen ate 3 bites of ham and pushed her plate forward. "It's a little sweet," she said to no one in particular. "I prefer a more savory glaze, but it's fine." Fine. There was that word again, the word she wielded like a blade, cutting just deep enough to wound but never enough to leave a visible mark. I survived Christmas dinner. I cleaned up alone again. I found Karen's sweet potato pie in the fridge the next morning, untouched. Not a single person had eaten a slice. But my chocolate cake? Gone. Every crumb. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. Because winning against Karen didn't matter if Brandon didn't see what she was doing. And he didn't. Or he wouldn't. Same difference. January was brutal. Brandon and I barely spoke. He worked late. I worked early. We existed in the same house like roommates with a shared mortgage. At night, I'd lie on my side of the bed. We'd stopped touching entirely by then and listen to him breathe. And I'd think, when did I become this person? When did I become the woman who measures her worth by whether her mother-in-law eats a second helping? On January 14th, I called my mom's facility in Salina. The nurse, a kind woman named Denise, told me Mom had had a bad week. She wasn't eating much. She'd stopped recognizing the staff. "She asked for someone named Ashley yesterday," Denise said softly. "First time in months." I drove to Salina that Saturday, 2 hours each way. Brandon didn't offer to come. I didn't ask. Mom was sitting in a wheelchair by the window wearing a cardigan I'd bought her 2 Christmases ago. She looked smaller. Her hair was thinner. Her hands, folded in her lap, were the same hands that had written "double the cinnamon" in the margins of a cookbook that Karen had tried to throw away. "Hey, Mom," I said, kneeling beside her. "It's Ashley, your daughter." She looked at me, through me. Then something flickered, a tiny spark behind her eyes, there and gone. "Ashley," she whispered, "you're the one who cooks." I grabbed her hand and pressed it to my face, and I wept. Right there in that facility that smelled like antiseptic and boiled carrots. I wept like I was 6 years old again, back in the double wide, and she was the only person in the world who could make it okay. "I don't know what I'm doing, Mom," I said. "I'm so lost." She squeezed my hand, weak, barely there, but intentional. "You cook," she said again. "That's what you do. You feed people." I drove home in silence. No radio, no podcast, nothing. Just the hum of the road and the flat Kansas horizon, and a feeling in my chest that wasn't the cold stone anymore. It was something else, something sharper. A decision that hadn't fully formed yet but was taking shape, molecule by molecule, like crystals growing in a jar. I got home at 7. The house was dark. Brandon's truck was in the driveway, but the lights were off. I walked in, set my keys on the counter, and heard voices from the bedroom. Not voices. A voice. Karen's voice. Coming from Brandon's phone on speaker. And I'm telling you, she's not going to change. You need to face that. She'll never be what you need, honey. She doesn't know how to be a wife. Not a real one. Brandon's response was muffled. I couldn't hear his words, but I heard his tone, tired, resigned, agreeable. The tone of a man who had stopped fighting a long time ago. You deserve better, Karen continued. You've always deserved better. And I know it's hard to hear, but sometimes the kindest thing is to let someone go before... I stepped on a creaky floorboard. The voices stopped. A pause. Then Brandon appeared in the bedroom doorway, phone in hand, face unreadable. "How's your mom?" he asked, like nothing had happened. "She recognized me today," I said. "For about 30 seconds. He nodded. "That's good." Then he walked past me to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared into it like it held the answers to questions he'd never asked me. I stood in the hallway. The house was quiet. Karen's white dish towels hung from the oven handle. My spice rack was still in the wrong place, and the decision that had been forming in my chest all day finally crystallized into a single, clear thought. I'm going to save myself. Because no one else is coming. The next morning, Monday, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee, and I started making a list. Not an emotional list, a strategic one. The kind of list you make when you stop being a victim and start being a person with a plan. Item 1, finances. I pulled up our joint bank account. Balance, $4,200. I pulled up the mortgage statement. We owed $221,000. I pulled up my personal savings, the account I'd kept separate, the one Brandon didn't know about because he'd never asked. Balance, $3,800. Not much, but mine. Item 2, legal. I searched divorce attorney Spring Hill, Kansas, and wrote down 3 names. I didn't call yet, but I wrote them down. Seeing them on paper made it real. Item 3, evidence. This one made my hands shake. I opened my phone and scrolled back through months of text messages between me and Brandon. Every time I'd told him about something Karen said, every time he dismissed me. "You're overreacting. Mom was just trying to help. Can you please stop making everything about you?" I screenshotted everything. I emailed the screenshots to myself and to a new Gmail account I created, ashleywhitfield.backup@gmail.com. Then I did something I'd never done before. I called Megan, Brandon's sister. The one who'd gasped when she saw my roasted chicken. The one who'd stared at her plate when Karen dismissed my cheesecake. The one who mumbled something I couldn't hear when Karen said I didn't have the instinct. The phone rang 4 times. I almost hung up. "Ashley?" Megan sounded surprised. We'd never called each other directly. Our entire relationship existed in the context of family dinners and group texts. "Hi, Megan. Do you have a minute?" A pause. "Sure. Is everything okay?" "No," I said. "It's not, and I think you know that." Silence. Long, heavy silence. I could hear her breathing. Then quietly, "Yeah, I know. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Has your mom ever talked about me to you? Directly? About me not being good enough for Brandon?" Another pause. When Megan spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Ashley, she talks about it constantly. Every time I see her, every phone call, she has this whole narrative that you trapped Brandon, that you got pregnant on purpose. I've never been pregnant. I know that. But she tells people you had a miscarriage early on and that you used it to guilt Brandon into staying. She tells Patricia. She tells Rachel. She told Brandon's old college friends at the reunion last summer. She's been building a case against you for years, Ashley, and Brandon just lets her." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the kitchen table. A miscarriage I never had. A pregnancy that never existed. Karen had invented an entire false history and distributed it to everyone in Brandon's life like a press release. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "Because I was scared," Megan said, and her voice cracked. "She's my mom, and you don't know what she's like when you cross her. She cut off my Aunt Linda for 3 years over a comment about her potato salad. 3 years. No calls, no holidays, nothing. I can't afford to be cut off, Ashley. I'm a single mom. She watches my kids on weekends. I need her. I understood. I hated it, but I understood. Megan, I need you to do something for me. I need you to write down everything she's told you about me. Dates, if you can remember them. Who else was present? Everything. Silence. Please, I said. I'm not asking you to testify in court. I'm asking you to tell the truth, in writing, to me. She'll find out. Not from me, I promise you that. Another long pause. Then, okay, give me a few days. I hung up and sat there staring at my list. 3 items. Finances, legal, evidence, the bones of a plan, the skeleton of a new life. My phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. Mom wants to do a New Year's dinner. She's thinking the 6th. You'll cook, right? I stared at that text for a full minute. Then I typed back, sure, I'd love to. And for the first time in 3 years, when I said I'd cook for Karen, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't performing. I wasn't begging for approval from a woman who'd decided before she ever met me that I'd never deserve her son. I was planning. And the meal I was about to prepare for January 6th would be the last one I'd ever cook in that house. Karen just didn't know it yet. The week before January 6th, I cooked like a woman possessed. But this time, the cooking wasn't the point. The cooking was the stage. The real work happened in the hours between. On Monday, I met with a divorce attorney named Catherine Reeves. Her office was in a small building off Santa Fe Drive in Olathe. Beige carpet, framed diplomas, a dish of butterscotch candies on her desk. She was in her 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose. She listened to me talk for 45 minutes without interrupting once. When I finished, she took off her glasses and said, Ashley, do you have documentation? I slid a manila folder across her desk. Inside, screenshots of every text where Brandon dismissed my concerns about Karen. Megan's written statement, 3 pages, single-spaced, detailing every lie Karen had spread about me, including the invented miscarriage. Photos of the kitchen donate box with my mother's cookbooks inside, Karen's handwriting on the label, a log I'd kept for the past 2 weeks of every time Karen entered our house using her unauthorized key, time-stamped by our Ring doorbell camera that she apparently didn't know existed. Catherine flipped through the pages. Her expression didn't change, but she nodded slowly. This is thorough, she said. This is very thorough. I grew up with nothing, I told her. I learned early that nobody saves you. You save yourself, and you bring receipts. She almost smiled. Here's what I recommend. Kansas is a no-fault divorce state, but this documentation helps with equitable distribution, and frankly, with narrative if anything gets contested. Your $8,000 contribution to the down payment is documented? I have the bank transfer receipt. Good. And this personal savings account, $3,800. Was that funded solely from your income? Every penny. Then it's yours. Now, about the house. We talked for another hour. She explained equitable distribution, the mortgage situation, my options. By the time I left her office, I had a plan. A real one. With timelines and paperwork and a retainer of $2,500 that I paid from my personal account. I had $1,300 left. Enough for a deposit on a small apartment if I needed one. On Wednesday, Megan called me. She sounded nervous, almost breathless. Ashley, I need to tell you something. Mom's planning something for the dinner on the 6th. Planning what? She's been calling everyone. Me, Patricia, Rachel. She told us she's going to have a conversation with you at dinner in front of Brandon. She says it's time to clear the air about your marriage. My blood went cold. What does that mean, Megan? It means she's going to ambush you. She's going to lay out everything she thinks is wrong with you, the cooking, the background, all of it, and she's going to ask Brandon to choose, right there at the table. She's done it before. Done it before? To who? Brandon's college girlfriend, Sarah. They dated for 2 years. Mom invited her to Easter dinner and dismantled her in front of the whole family. Sarah left crying and never came back. Brandon didn't even walk her to her car. I sat down on the edge of my bed. My legs felt like water. And Brandon went along with it? Brandon always goes along with it. That's the point. She does this because she knows he'll side with her. Every time. It's like A ritual. A ritual. Karen had a ritual for destroying the women in her son's life, and I was next on the altar. Megan, will you be there on the 6th? She expects me to be. Good. I need you there, and I need you to do exactly what you've always done. Sit there and say nothing until I give you a signal. Then I need you to tell the truth. Silence. I could hear her fear through the phone. What kind of signal? She whispered. You'll know. January 6th. I woke at 5 a.m. again. Same routine, apron on, coffee brewing, kitchen warm, but my hands weren't shaking this time. My chest didn't hold a cold stone. Instead, there was something new, something that felt like the first morning after a fever breaks. Clarity. I roasted a chicken. A beautiful 7-pound bird, same as Thanksgiving. Herb butter, rosemary, thyme from my windowsill garden. I made roasted potatoes, homemade gravy, my grandmother's cornbread. I set the table with the wedding china, cloth napkins, candles, fresh flowers. And in the bedroom closet, in a tote bag behind my winter coats, I placed a second manila folder, copies of everything Catherine had, plus one addition Megan had emailed me that morning, a screenshot of a group text between Karen, Patricia, and Rachel from November, in which Karen had written, word for word, "Don't worry, by spring she'll be gone. I'm handling it." I'm handling it. Like I was a pest to be exterminated, a problem to be managed, an obstacle between Karen and the only thing she'd ever truly loved, total control of her son. The guests arrived at 2. Same cast. Karen walked in first, no knock, her key, and set her purse on my counter. She looked at the table and said, "Cloth napkins again? You do try hard, don't you?" I smiled. I do. Brandon was in the living room, already checked out, scrolling his phone. Megan came in next, gave me a hug that lasted a beat too long, and squeezed my hand. Patricia and Rachel followed. Everyone sat down. I brought out the chicken on my grandmother's platter, the white ceramic with the tiny blue flowers. I set it in the center of the table. It was perfect. Golden, crackling, fragrant. I'd outdone myself, and I knew it. Karen looked at it. Then she looked at me, and she stood up. "Actually," she said, picking up the platter, "before we eat, I think we need to talk." She carried my chicken, my grandmother's platter, into the kitchen. I followed. Everyone followed. And there, in my kitchen, in front of every person in Brandon's family, Karen scraped the entire bird into the trash can, the potatoes, the gravy, all of it. She pressed the pedal with her foot and let the lid slam shut. "This is garbage," she said. "And I think it's time we all stopped pretending." She turned to Brandon. "Honey, I've held my tongue for years, but I can't anymore. This woman," she pointed at me, "is not the wife you deserve. She comes from nothing. She cooks like she's still in that trailer, and she has been poisoning this family against me since the day you married her." Brandon stood frozen. His face was pale. He looked at me, then at his mother, then at the trash can, and then, God help him, he said it. "Mom's right, Ashley. You should have asked her what she wanted. Just thank her for being honest and make another chicken. We have guests." The room was silent. Megan stared at the floor. Patricia's hand was over her mouth. Rachel had actually put her phone down. I looked at Brandon for a long moment. The man I'd married. The man I'd cooked for, cleaned for, diminished myself for. The man who let his mother dismantle me piece by piece and called it love. "Okay," I said quietly. "Give me 5 minutes." I walked to the bedroom. I retrieved the tote bag from the closet. I pulled out the manila folder, and I walked back to the kitchen. Karen was beaming. She'd won. She could taste it. Brandon was standing beside her, united front, mother and son against the trailer park girl who dared to think she belonged. "I'm not making another chicken," I said. I set the folder on the kitchen island and opened it. "But I do have something to serve." I pulled out the first page, Megan's written statement. "This is a signed account from your daughter," I said to Karen, "detailing 3 years of lies you've told about me, including a miscarriage that never happened." Karen's face went white. She looked at Megan. Megan didn't look away this time. She stood up straight and nodded once. "That's true," Megan said, her voice shaking but clear. "Every word. I'm done lying for you, Mom." I pulled out the second page, the group text screenshot. I held it up so everyone could see. "This is a text you sent to Patricia and Rachel in November. By spring, she'll be gone. I'm handling it. You've been planning to destroy my marriage, in writing." Patricia made a small sound. Rachel took a step back. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I pulled out the Ring doorbell logs. "These are records of you entering my home 14 times in 2 months while I was at work, without my knowledge or consent. You moved my things. You boxed up my dead mother's cookbooks and labeled them for donation." Brandon's head snapped toward Karen. "You told me she said it was okay." "She didn't ask me," I said. "She never asked me. And you never asked me either, Brandon. You just gave her the key." I set the folder down. I looked at my husband. His face was gray. He was seeing it, all of it, for the first time. Or maybe he was seeing it for the 100th time and finally couldn't look away. "I filed for divorce on Monday," I said. "My attorney is Catherine Reeves. She has copies of everything in this folder, plus documentation of my $8,000 contribution to this house. I'll be moved out by the end of the month." Karen found her voice. "Brandon, she's bluffing. She's manipulating you. This is exactly what I warned you about. Stop." Brandon's voice cracked. He wasn't looking at Karen. He was looking at the trash can, at the remains of 4 hours of work, buried under coffee grounds. "Mom, stop. Brandon Michael Whitfield, you listen to me." I said stop. The kitchen went dead silent. Brandon was shaking. His hands, his jaw, his shoulders, everything trembling. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes in over a year. Recognition. Like he was waking up from a very long sleep and realizing the house was on fire. "Ashley," he said, "I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said. "But sorry doesn't undo 3 years, and it doesn't undo tonight." I took off my apron. I folded it neatly and set it on the counter next to Karen's purse. Then I picked up my grandmother's platter, the white ceramic with the tiny blue flowers, now empty, scraped clean, and I held it against my chest. "This was my grandmother's," I said to no one in particular. "It's the only thing of hers I have, and it's coming with me." I walked out of that kitchen, past Karen, who had aged 10 years in 5 minutes, past Brandon, who was crying now, actually crying, not the performative tears his mother had taught him, past Megan, who mouthed, "I'm sorry," as I passed, past Patricia and Rachel, who would never look at Karen the same way again. I drove to a Holiday Inn off I-35 with my grandmother's platter on the passenger seat and a suitcase I'd packed 3 days earlier in the trunk. I checked in. I sat on the edge of the bed. And for the first time in 3 years, the cold stone in my chest was gone. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Catherine got me my $8,000 back plus a fair split of the equity we'd built. I walked away with $19,000 total. Brandon didn't contest anything. Karen tried to call me twice. I blocked her number both times. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Overland Park, not far from where Brandon and I first met at that barbecue. I hung my mother's cookbooks on a little shelf above the stove. I put my grandmother's platter on the wall like art. Mom passed away in March, quietly, in her sleep. The last time she recognized me, 2 weeks before the end, she squeezed my hand and said, "You're the one who cooks." I told her yes. I told her I was still cooking. I told her everything I made because of her. I'm 32 now. I work at the same dental practice. I still make $52,000 a year. My credit score is 760. My savings account has $7,200 in it. Not much, but growing. On weekends, I cook elaborate meals for myself and invite Megan over sometimes. She left Karen's orbit 6 months after the dinner. She brings her kids. They love my cornbread. Last week, I made a roasted chicken. 7 pounds, herb butter, rosemary, and thyme. I served it on my grandmother's platter. I sat at my own table, in my own apartment, and I ate it slowly. Every bite. Nobody called it garbage. Nobody told me to try harder. Nobody scraped it into the trash. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, the food tasted exactly the way it was supposed to. Like love. Like safety. Like proof that the girl from the double wide made it out. Not because someone saved her, but because she finally stopped waiting to be saved.